Hi, I'm Alex Valentine, Enterprise Editor.
I'm Robert Connelly, business reporter.
And we are here at the Quad City Times Dispatch Argus newsroom talking about our Countdown to Legalization project ahead of Illinois legalizing recreational marijuana on January 1st. We are 3 days into our Countdown to Legalization series. Just a little bit of information about why we decided to do this series. So as a bi-state community where the population is split fairly close to 50-50, the Quad Cities is in a weird position where it's legal for half of the residents here and it's illegal still for half of the residents here. So that presents a lot of challenges and questions for that time where starting on January 1, you can have it on one side of the river, you go a couple of miles across the river and you can't have it. So we started our project with FAQs, which was just, we put out a call to people who said, what kind of questions do you have about legalization? Those were questions like, where can I smoke? How much can I buy? Can I still get drug tested by my work? The second story was a column from Barb Ickes on what made public opinion shift so fast on marijuana. And some of the things that we were told over the years that didn't quite match up with what we know today to be true about marijuana. And then the third story today, if you want to talk a little bit about those, the colleges piece.
Yeah, so underneath the law, there's going to be 8 pilot programs at community colleges in Illinois, and those are going to kind of have guidelines rolled out by the Illinois Department of Agriculture in the next week or two. And so we just kind of wanted to talk to the area schools and say, hey, are you guys looking at any type of curriculum or having a conversation? And Western Illinois University, with its campuses in Macomb and here in the Quad Cities, is having discussions about it. It might end up looking kind of like a teaching degree where you have classes. If you want to be a history teacher, you have your history classes, but you also have a number of classes in a variety of other sectors to kind of balance out your education so that you can be a teacher, whether or not it might be heavy on the ag side or maybe even kind of has biology, chemistry, kind of gets into the weeds, to use a pun, and maybe there would be business classes. So the 8 pilot programs for the community colleges that should be for fall 2020. So whether or not we have one in this area, this part of the state, remains to be seen. But so far, WIU is the only local college that's really having the conversation.
That business angle was especially interesting too, because it's not often that you have a brand new industry pop up. So that's an interesting place for some colleges to kind of be on the cutting edge of creating experts in this field that is only going to grow bigger in the Quad Cities. As part of that college's piece too, Vanessa Miller at the Gazette found some really interesting stuff that we combined with Robert's part of the story about curriculum. And that was that nothing is going to change now about possession of marijuana on campus. It still is illegal to have marijuana on any college campus. You can't have it, you can't smoke it. But she did find that enforcement of that has kind of tapered off in recent years. They don't seem to be arresting college kids anymore for possession. But as far as like the actual guidelines and college rules, nothing is going to change there. Tomorrow's story is a story from Barb Ickes on glassblowers in Muscatine who we talked about getting on the cutting edge of business. They kind of got on the cutting edge of creating pipes and water bongs and some of those things that you smoke out of. So some really cool art there, and just a profile feature on those growers in Muscatine, or on those glass blowers in Muscatine. Sunday, we're going to publish a story on public housing, and that even in Illinois, where it's legal, you still cannot smoke marijuana in public housing. If you want to talk a little bit more about that story, because Robert worked on that one.
Yeah, so a lot of what's happening is if entities receive federal funding, they're saying, hey, we're not going to be involved with this because that's, marijuana will still be federally illegal. So we're kind of entering a lot of those gray waters in that you have the state at opposite of state law. And so that's kind of where some of the conversation about smoking lounges somewhere for social use, but that's not really going to happen. And so Henry County and Rock Island County, they've been having forums and posters to just remind people, hey, even though the state law changes, nothing changes for us January 1st, and you would be subject to the same penalties, fines, potential eviction for use now as you would be a week from now. So just kind of be aware of that and what that may lead to. I'm not sure if that maybe leads to more public consumption or, I guess we'll see what happens after 6 a.m. January 1st.
And then I'll run down. We've got a couple more stories. I'll run down those real quick. And if you have any questions that you've been thinking of, some people sent us some on Facebook and over email yesterday. If you have any more just burning questions, drop them in the comments, and we'll be sure to address them. On Monday, we've got a law enforcement piece coming, which is, I think the essential question there is whether police are any closer to a DUI equivalent for marijuana. There's drug tests that can tell if you used pot over an extended period of time, but to determine whether you are like actively high right now, some kind of scientific method like a breathalyzer. And then also talking to local law enforcement agencies to see what they're expecting, whether what they're worried about, what they're, just kind of their forecast for January. On New Year's Eve, we'll have a roundup of local legislators, where they stand on pot, what kind of cleanup legislation they expect at the next Illinois state session. And then on New Year's Day, we'll have a roundup of where we stand, what cities in Illinois have approved bringing in a dispensary, which ones have not. And then on New Year's, the day after New Year's, Linda Cook is going when the dispensary at Nature's Treatment of Illinois opens at 6 a.m., and she'll be there for their kind of big camp out party atmosphere, which should be a neat kind of thing. So one question we've got here, this is probably a decent one for you, Robert, is what is the biggest misconception about the new law?
I think that there were a lot of headlines and celebration when the law was signed in late June that, hey, it's going to be legal on January 1st. But I don't think people realize that you can only consume in your home, and if you're a renter, not just public housing, but if you're a renter in a complex, you probably can't smoke either inside. So while it has been legalized, there are kind of a lot of questions about where are people even supposed to go, which then kind of leads into a tourism conversation about, social use, social consumption, like if people could, smoke inside of an establishment and then see a concert, things like that, kind of like a bar atmosphere. Those things just aren't going to be set up in the near future. The only indoor smoking lounge that could have happened was Hickey Brothers in downtown Rock Island, but unfortunately they're closing, and there had been some conversations between Michelle and the city of Rock Island, especially Alderman Dylan Parker, but those talks kind of stalled, and she was in a kind of a tight business position. So I think where you're actually supposed to consume it is kind of still a big question moving forward, and maybe legislators might address that early, maybe they won't. I guess one of the benefits to the current supply problem is that there won't be flower for recreational users for a while. So, if you're if you're vaping or if you're using an edible, people might not know that you're consuming. So, not to encourage illicit practices, but that's kind of the real situation that people are looking at in the first couple weeks, maybe even couple months.
Mm-hmm. And that's a big one, is the supply issue. Come January 1, there's not really going to be flower, which is the traditional, what you think of, the bud that you would like break up and use a lighter and smoke. That's not really going to be available for recreational users. Illinois' law is set up so that dispensaries first have to serve their medical patients. So the medical patients are going to be the ones getting that traditional, marijuana bud, which would leave for recreational users things like edibles and vapes and stuff like that. If you want to talk a little bit, because you've done a lot of reporting on that supply shortage, like what they expect, what kind of timeline they're looking at, like how long do they expect this to be an issue?
So they're hoping that by the end of February, I think in February they hope to have it resolved to a certain extent. But the thing that's kind of lost in the supply issue is that you have to remember that we're dealing with a plant. Like, it has to have time to grow, and it has to go through its maturation process. So GTI here in Rock Island, they got their recreational growing license, and in the state of Illinois, it goes from seed to sale. So it's not just that you have a warehouse full of marijuana. You have designated medical, and then you have designated recreational, and they don't really cross too much. And so when the state law was passed, it was several weeks until the first cultivation license was granted for recreational. And so you're talking August, September. You're given 3 months for just a few of the cultivation centers. They're all now recreational licenses. I think the last one was handed out last week, or maybe that was earlier this week. And so I think the supply issue should kind of start to catch up a bit, but at the same time, they aren't adding any more cultivation centers till the end of 2021, and they're going to be adding some craft growers, but the amount of users is going to increase quite a bit. And we don't really know details on how big of an expansion GTI had in Rock Island. They did expand. They did add some jobs. So, we're just kind of hoping on further expansion. But, again, they need a certain amount of time in sunlight, a certain amount of time in darkness, and it's just kind of a process.
Another question that people have often asked is what this will do to the marijuana black market, whether that'll still exist. That kind of still remains to be seen. I know in some of our reporting earlier this year, a lot of officers said that they still kind of expected that to be there, that this wasn't going to just wipe that off altogether. Because part of it is that when you buy legal marijuana, there's a tax on it, and it's just going to trend a little bit more expensive. Part of that is that you get away from a black market, right? That you're not doing it illegally or doing it from somebody you don't know that well. But it just kind of remains to be seen what's going to happen with pricing and availability and some of that stuff. So that's one that's tough to answer so far. Another major one was whether your employer can still drug test you, even if you live in Illinois and it's legal in Illinois. If you want to take that one a little bit, because I know you did a little reporting on that.
Yeah, so pre-employment will still stay the same, but they're still trying to figure out kind of on the back end some things. One of the things that came up at a forum at the Rock Island Public Library was, say you're at home, your roommate's smoking, you come into work, you smell of marijuana, they have a reasonable suspicion test, what do you do? And there wasn't really an answer, but for the most part, there are going to be, it's very much like alcohol. So as long as you're not, on the clock drunk, as long as you're not on the clock, under the influence, which then that gets into the whole question about, what is under the influence and kind of the cleanup legislation needed on that. But there are some protections, but there definitely needs to be some more clarity. Obviously, if you have any type of commercial driving license or forklift or anything like that, it's probably going to be business as usual. Obviously, there's a lot more safety requirements and a lot more restrictions on those types of jobs versus sitting at a desk or working in retail, things like that. So if you're not sure, ask your employer, or just ask. If you're not sure, just ask at work, or hopefully there have been some type of memos or things at your individual workplaces. If you work in Iowa, nothing's changing in Iowa. It's only Illinois. So if you're an Illinois resident and you work in Iowa, I'd probably stay on the safe side and maybe just not enter the market yet and just kind of wait to see how it plays out for the first couple weeks.
which is a good rule of thumb across the board in Iowa, is that nothing changes here. We can see Illinois out our window here in the newsroom. On that side, it's illegal. On that side, it'll be legal January 1. Where we stand today, it'll still be illegal. You can still be, you can still get in trouble for having it. You can certainly get in trouble for selling it, smoking it. Marijuana, nothing changes come January 1 here. One question we got here on the Facebook, and this will be a good one. You can probably get in the weeds a little bit on this because I know you did a whole lot of this reporting. So why won't edibles and vaping be affected by supply issues the same way that the flower will be?
So the way it's been explained to me is that so during the growing process, the best product is saved as flower. And that is what is being saved for the medical patients because the medical patients take priority. And so what's left is taken to the infusing part, which is where they extract it and put it into products, whether it's vape cartridges or it's baked goods, things like that. And so I think because of the medical benefits of smoking, it seems to, I think, kind of get in your system a little bit quicker, and so that might help with the medical side of things. And so that's kind of why flower is being saved for or being kind of set aside for medical, and you can use at least the edibles and vaping to start with. Another thing that's going on right now in terms of the black market is that there's a belief that certain parts of the industry might benefit from the vaping crisis, and that there's testing that goes on in the legal market, and you know exactly what's in what you're buying, and you can ask for lab tests, things like that at dispensaries. You can't do that when you're buying online or wherever the illicit vaping market is. So while there has been quite a bit of talk about the vitamin E and kind of the whole vaping crisis, vaping should be safe if you're buying from a licensed dispensary.
One other question that we got, and this is something we hit on in our FAQs, which published on Christmas Eve. You can find that on QCTimes.com and QCOnline.com. And Matt Enright handled this one, our health reporter. He talked to doctors about, is this safe to smoke? How much is too much? And the comparison to alcohol here is often similar, but in this one a little bit different because it varies so much by the person. Some people are predisposed to not handle the reaction well. You hear a lot, and you hear a lot of stories, and that's part of the problem is that there are a lot more anecdotes than hard research at this point. But you hear a lot of anecdotes about people who, if they have anxiety issues, that rather than fix those, it can exacerbate those issues, or things, just negative side effects like that, where the typical euphoria doesn't really happen, and it's more of a negative effect. What Matt Enright got from doctors was essentially start slow if you're starting. An edible would be start with like 2 milligrams or 3 milligrams. Start with a slow THC percentage for marijuana, which would be like 2 or 3%, which is what's currently legal in Iowa for medical marijuana patients. 2 or 3% is very, very small. Those numbers go up well into the 20% for some marijuana. So start slow. Don't jump right in if you're just starting. And obviously consume it safely the same way you would alcohol. Don't drive. Don't do it when you have things to do, that kind of thing. In the FAQs, we got into some of the differences between like flowers and edibles and oils. I don't think we'll hit on that too much today, but again, that's in the FAQ story if you want to check that out online. One other bit, and we'll wrap up here soon, but one other bit that you might want to talk about a little bit is local government sharing in the revenue from sales and kind of what the advantage is for a given municipality in the Illinois Quad Cities to allow dispensaries. Like if I run Silvis or Milan, why would I want a dispensary? What's the advantage for me?
So most of the local organizations that did opt in, which was to there was a vote to opt in or opt out. If you opted in, you said, yeah, we're going to allow marijuana businesses in. And then there were zoning maps that came out saying, hey, this is where we're going to allow businesses like these. And it was kind of color-coded, or at least in East Moline it was. Pretty easy to read map. And so most of the local entities then took the next step, which was you could do up to a 3% local sales tax. Most municipalities did the maximum of up to 3%. I think the counties goes above that. And so you're going to get 3% of an industry that's expected to bring in quite a bit of revenue from all the projections that came out of the state. And so whether that goes into your general fund, I know some municipalities have earmarked it for law enforcement. Other ones haven't really planned for anything because you don't plan for something you don't know. There's also some talk about where one of the dispensaries might end up, because we're going to have one additional dispensary for Rock Island, Henry, and Mercer counties, but it's only going to be one additional one outside of Milan, with the recreational and medical dispensaries there at Nature's Treatment of Illinois and the Milan Industrial Park. And so the betting money is it's probably going to end up in Moline, Rock Island, or East Moline, kind of somewhere up here. And so 3% could be several thousands of dollars, maybe even into the hundreds. Just not really sure how much of the supply issues hurts those projections. I'm not entirely sure, but I would think by summer we probably have a pretty good feel after a couple months, especially in Milan, with what will that local sales tax truly mean for local government.
Yeah, whole lot of wait and see, and some of the stuff is going to be ironed out. I think probably we'll wrap up here with just a couple of quick hits of things that, if you missed earlier, just kind of the essential things that you should know ahead of next Wednesday when marijuana is officially legal in Illinois. First is, where can you smoke? Illinois residents can smoke in a home that they own, and that's pretty much it right now. And even if you are in a home that you own, you cannot smoke in the presence of juveniles. No kids, no teens, no one under the age of 21. You can't smoke in your car. You can't smoke on the street. You can't smoke in a public establishment, in a house that you own, and that's pretty much it. How much can you buy? Illinois residents can buy up to 30 grams. Out-of-state residents, such as Iowans, can buy up to 15. But obviously, Iowans can't then take that back with them to Iowa because it still is illegal in Iowa. But again, supply shortage, it's going to be a while before recreational users can buy flower here in the Quad Cities anyway. Yes, your employer can still drug test you. It's up to individual companies. Make sure you know your company's rules. And how can you pay for it if you do go to Nature's Treatment? Cash only, and you must have a photo ID. The sellers will verify your home state and your age before you can even enter the dispensary. And then once there, cash only, have an ID. And I think that pretty much wraps it up. If you guys have any other questions that you think of, feel free to email either of us at avalentine@qctimes.com or rconnelly@qconline.com. Thanks for tuning in, and as always, thanks for reading.